One piece of smart technology could help solve a murder mystery in Arkansas.
Two Pine Bluff teens are in jail tonight facing murder charges. Police say they are in custody in connection to the shooting death of two 17-year-olds.
It was a bizarre story in Russellville, Arkansas today. A man who reportedly quit his job over low pay went on a shooting spree with two handguns.
Tributes are pouring in for Ann Presley. The Little Rock TV anchorwoman died over the weekend.
A suspect in the deadly Fayetteville shooting on New Year's Day in court this morning.
A Little Rock mother is pleading for help tonight. She is asking anyone.
Thanks for listening to Strictly Homicide, an Arkansas true crime podcast covering lesser-known cases out of the natural state. I'd like to start off by thanking my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to help support us, you can find us on Patreon and help with as little as $1 a month. There's also a donate button for a one-time donation on strictlyhomicide.com. Please stay tuned until the end of the show to hear a few promos from some of my favorite shows. Warning: Strictly Homicide covers cases that include sexual assault, violence, and homicide. Episodes may contain explicit language and are not suitable for young ears. Listener discretion is advised. Since 1820, over 500 individuals have been executed in the state of Arkansas. From 1820 to 1913, the method the state of Arkansas used was hanging. In 1913, they switched to the electric chair, and the one they used was actually constructed out of the wood that previously made the state's gallows. They used this chair until January 24, 1964, when they executed Charles Fields. When capital punishment was reinstated, they used a new electric chair, but only once before the preferred method was switched to lethal injection. In the many years that Arkansas has been using capital punishment, only 3 individuals volunteered to be put to death: Ronald Gene Simmons, Christina Marie Riggs, who was covered in a prior episode, and Clay King Smith. In April 2017, Arkansas and its capital punishment made national news. The state's supply of the lethal drugs used in the executions were expiring, and getting replacement drugs isn't as easy as you'd think. The companies that supply these drugs, like Pfizer, refuse to sell to prisons, stating that they distribute the drugs to save lives, not end them. This makes it nearly impossible for the prisons to legally receive the drugs. A handful of states decided to stockpile them instead of using compound pharmacies, Arkansas being one of those states. The problem with stockpiling the drugs is that they expire when they aren't being used. And when the expiration dates are approaching, the state has a choice to make: use the drugs or toss them, and Arkansas didn't want to waste their supplies. There was over 200 vials of the drugs expiring when Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson made the inhumane decision to execute 8 men over an 11-day period. He scheduled 2 men to be executed a day for 4 days, which increased the risk of human error. This choice was purely a convenience to the state of Arkansas, treating the executions like a conveyor belt. This was the first time a state has rushed executions to kill as many inmates as they can before a drug expired. The executions were then scheduled for 4 days between April 17th and April 27th to get use out of the state's supply of the drugs used during the lethal injections. All 8 of the men that were up for execution had a few things in common: mental illnesses, intellectual disabilities, and a traumatic upbringing. I'm not saying that these men weren't monsters or that they didn't deserve their punishment. No matter a person's stance on the death penalty, the way the state went about this was inhumane. Arkansas also has a reputation for wrongful convictions. It is said that it's almost like a small drug ring inside the prisons when it comes to execution drugs. Some states were exchanging football tickets for some of the drugs, and most of the time, the person in charge of finding the drugs were not even medically trained. I get that there was usually an awful crime that was committed, but these are still lives. First, the person is injected with a sedative. Then, they are injected with a drug that causes muscle paralysis. And the final drug that they are injected with is the one that stops the heart, potassium chloride. The sedative drug is often used during anesthesia just to relax the patient, but in a high enough dose, it should render the patient unconscious to guarantee that they feel no pain. They claim this is the most humane way to execute someone, but experts disagree. The first inmate to be executed with this drug shook his head, blinked, and opened his mouth during his execution. A few months later, Ohio would use the drug in the execution of Dennis McGuire, who snorted, heaved, clenched one fist, and gasped for air during his execution. The state of Oklahoma scheduled Clayton Lockett in 2014 to be executed. Not long after him, Charles Warner was also scheduled. Clayton received a stay the day before he was scheduled to be executed, but the governor stepped in and said she did not recognize the stay granted and scheduled his execution for April 29, 2014, the same day as Charles. The execution went terribly wrong, and they postponed Charles' date in the end. The paramedic that was to administer the IV never had participated in an execution. She was very nervous before she even began. She entered the room and noticed that none of the equipment was right, but went on with the process anyways. She forgot to tape down the IV after she stuck it into the vein and it slipped out. She then struggled to stick the IV back into the vein, trying and failing 3 times. The doctor that was there was only there to observe that everything was being done correctly, because aiding in the execution goes against the doctor's professional oath to never do harm. The paramedic had no choice but to ask for his assistance. They tried a few more times and then a central line, but nothing worked. They decided to try for a vein located near the groin, but this type of IV would need a special long needle, nearly double the size of the needle, and they didn't have one available. They tried anyways and somehow managed to get the IV into the vein, so they thought. Usually there are 2 IVs, but because they had so many issues they lost time, so they skipped the second one. The paramedic noticed that the saline only flowed when she propped up the line. This was not good, but after what they went through, she decided that taping it in place would be better than starting over. A sheet was draped over him to his chest, and then they began. They administered the sedative, and somehow the IV dislodged and the sedative was pumped into his tissue and only a tiny bit into his bloodstream. The inmate turned his head, licked his lips, and closed his eyes. He was clearly still conscious. 7 minutes later, the doctor said he was ready for the next drug. This drug paralyzes the muscles, and the brain can no longer control the body. The stage will look serene because they cannot move, but they are in fact suffocating. Next was the final drug, and this was when Lockett began moving, kicking his legs, breathing heavily, clenching his teeth, rolling his head, and trying to speak. He then tried to free himself from the restraints and get off of the gurney, all while the witnesses watched. The potassium chloride should have stopped his heart immediately, but all it did was slow down his heartbeat, down to the low 20s. Lockett then spoke. Man. At this point, the doctor lifted the sheets and found a protrusion the size of a tennis ball near his groin. Blood and clear liquid began pooling around his groin, and he actually opened his eyes. This was the point when they shut the witness blind. The doctor attempted to get another IV in, but instead hit an artery. He continued anyways. As the potassium chloride continued to drip into his bloodstream, his heart rate lowered into the 10s. They stopped the execution, and then he slowly died. It took all of that for them to realize that they shouldn't execute another man right after that. It's very easy to make a mistake, especially if the people participating are not trained. Since this has happened, no other state attempted to execute 2 men in one day until 2017, when Arkansas decided to schedule 2 inmates in one day, not once but 4 times. For my next series, I'll be talking about those 8 cases. The next few episodes, I'll be discussing these 8 inmates and their case. The first 2 inmates that were scheduled were Bruce Earl Ward and Don W. Davis, scheduled to be executed on April 17, 2017. This episode, which is the first part of the series, will be the case of Bruce Earl Ward. Officer Middleton of Little Rock Police Department was on patrol with his ride-along around 2:45 a.m. on August 11, 1989. He was driving south on Rodney Parham Road, passing by the Jackpot store when he noticed that the store looked empty. The officer decided to go inside and see if the clerk was in the back and make sure that everything was safe. He called out, "Hello? Hello?" looking to see if someone was in the back of the store, but no one answered. He felt like this was very suspicious, so he called for backup and exited the store to check around. The officer decided to walk around the outside of the building to see if anyone was out there. He noticed a man wearing a red motorcycle helmet walking near the bathrooms. The man walked over to his bike and sat down on it. The man asked the patrolman what was going on. The officer said that he wasn't able to locate the store clerk. The man told the officer that he was inside the store drinking hot chocolate with the clerk when he asked if he could use the restroom. The clerk then gave him the key, and he went outside and used the restroom. He said that she was in the back stalking when he exited the store. The second officer arrived and walked over to Officer Middleton and asked him what was going on. Officer Middleton told him that he can't locate the store clerk and asked the officer to stand with this man while he rechecked the store. At this time, Officer Timmons arrived at the scene and helped search outside. Officer Timmons went into the restrooms to check, and when he went into the male's restroom, he found a body lying on the floor. He came out of the restrooms, pointed his gun at the man, and told him to place his hands on the vehicle. The body was the clerk, 18-year-old Rebecca Doss. She had been strangled to death and had a key to the restroom lying near her hand. They questioned the man, and he stated that the clerk gave him the woman's bathroom key, so he didn't enter the men's bathroom. The problem with his answer is that the key to the women's bathroom was still in the store in a box behind the counter. They searched the man and found a receipt from the store on it with the name Becky and her phone number written on it. The store had surveillance cameras, but the video part wasn't working, only audio. On the audio, you can hear the clerk saying, "Do you need help with that?" Then you hear a male's voice respond, "Yes, if you please." And then the audio is silent until you hear Officer Middleton yelling out, "Hello." The man that they questioned and now had handcuffed was Bruce Earl Ward. Bruce moved to Little Rock from Baton, Texas with his girlfriend at the time, Melissa. They moved into an apartment with her parents behind Rodney Parham. After a few months, Bruce and Melissa left and started staying at the Salvation Army for a few weeks before breaking up. Melissa said that she never saw Bruce because he was always working, selling perfume to gas stations. Little Rock police brought Melissa and her dad in to listen to the audio. They didn't mention what went on or who they were arresting. They just asked them separately if they recognized the voice. Both of them immediately recognized Bruce's voice. During Bruce's questioning, he kept to his story that he was drinking hot chocolate with the clerk. He asked to use the restroom and she handed him the key to the women's bathroom, and that's when he exited the store and entered the restroom. They were able to gather 2 pieces of evidence, a styrofoam cup and a cigarette pack. Rebecca Doss was an 18-year-old Memphis native who had moved to Little Rock. She stood about 5'4" with an average build, and everyone who knew Rebecca had nothing but good things to say. She was friendly, sweet, and innocent, and had plans to get her GED and attend Ouachita Baptist University. Rebecca's father worked at the Jackpot before she did and helped her get the job. She had been working there for about 3 months and was a really good employee. She was a friendly girl, especially to all the regulars that came around the store, including Bruce. Another regular was the paper delivery man who would deliver the paper every morning around 2:20 a.m. The delivery man testified to a story in the trial saying that he saw Rebecca and Bruce at the store that morning around 2:25 a.m. He also told the police of a time that he saw Bruce and Rebecca at the store a few weeks prior. He said that Bruce was saying inappropriate things to Rebecca. The things that the delivery man reported that Bruce was saying are very sexual and inappropriate. I don't feel comfortable repeating them. He said that he told Rebecca she should contact the police and report the incident, but he is unsure if she did. The owner of the store said that he watched the tapes from all of the stores. He does not recall a time or anything like that where a customer came in and said anything inappropriate, so it's unclear if this is true or not. They questioned his ex-girlfriend about the statement, and she also said that that was not something Bruce would say. On August 11th, 1989, Melissa said that she saw Bruce earlier that night. They ate together at Denny's, and then they had an argument before they left. A bar owner from Little Rock testified that Bruce came into his establishment around 7 p.m., had about 7 or 8 beers, and then left around 12:30. He said that during the time he was there, he drank and socialized. The newspaper delivery man said that he was entering the jackpot on Rodney Parham around 2:20 a.m. Rebecca was behind the counter, while Bruce was exiting the store, agitated, and hit the door while holding his helmet. Rebecca yelled out to Bruce, and once he exited, the delivery man asked Rebecca if anything was wrong. She seemed nervous and upset to him. She told him no, and he left the store a few minutes later at about 2:25 a.m. So there's a 20-minute period where we don't know what happened to Rebecca. The autopsy of Rebecca was performed by the famous Fahmy Malak. She was found to be a healthy 18-year-old female who died due to strangulation. She has multiple scratches and a large bruise around her neck. He testified that the neck and voice box appeared to be damaged, as well with extensive bleeding in the strap muscles. She also had external signs of strangulation visible on her neck. They took fluids from Rebecca and found no semen in them, showing no signs of sexual assault. They tested the styrofoam cup and cigarette pack and found no fingerprints on the cup, but they did find Bruce's fingerprints on the cigarette. During trial, Bruce's history was brought up. They brought up a situation that occurred in 1977 that happened in Pennsylvania. Bruce was found guilty for manslaughter for killing a woman by strangulation. I wasn't able to find out too much on this case, but the jury in Pennsylvania reduced the original charges to voluntary manslaughter. The defense attorney in the Arkansas case claimed that they didn't have enough evidence to prove Bruce committed this crime. Initially, the trial ended in April 1990 as a mistrial. When they turned around and tried him again, he received the same results. Then they tried him again for a third time, this time getting a guilty verdict. Bruce was convicted of capital murder, and after a 50-minute deliberation, he was sentenced to the death penalty. 3 years later, the sentencing was overturned, only to have the death penalty imposed on him again for the third time on October 28, 1997, with the decision being upheld in the high courts in 2009. On February 27, 2017, Asa Hutchinson scheduled Bruce to be executed with Don Davis on April 17, 2017. On March 29, 2017, Bruce filed a complaint alleging that he was incompetent to be executed, raising the argument that he was deprived of the assistance of an independent mental health expert. Bruce won a temporary stay. His attorney has openly spoken about Bruce's mental health illness and his diagnosis with schizophrenia. Bruce has spent 28 years in solitary confinement without any treatment for his illness and doesn't understand the process of any of this. In March of this year, the Arkansas Supreme Court rejected his argument and lifted the stay of execution. On the next episode, part 2, we'll talk about Don Davis. Strictly Homicide is written, hosted, and produced by me, Nicki T. The original music is done by Mr. T. No, not that one. My Mr. T.
If you are a fan of the show, please make sure you are subscribed on iTunes and please rate and review the show. You can also find us on Patreon where you can support the show for as little as $1 a month.
If there is a case that you would like to discuss, or if you have any comments, corrections, or suggestions, send us an email at strictlyhomicide@yahoo.com or on social media. You can find us on most social media sites by searching Strictly Homicide Podcast and on Twitter as @StrictlyHMICIDE. That's Strictly Homicide with no O. You can also visit our website, strictlyhomicide.com. Stick around to hear a few promos from some of the best podcasts around, and until next time, y'all stay safe, especially you, Arkansas.
I'm Mo Blackwell, the host of Targeted True Crime Domestic Violence. We'll investigate one case of family violence each season using academic research to interpret the events so that we can become better advocates. Join us as we spotlight the death of 4-year-old Militia Gibson from her stepfather's abuse, delve into her family situation, break down the trial of her parents, and examine how her murder in 1976 led to changes in social service departments around the United States. Is there something we can learn about family violence through examining her murder? I think there is. She wasn't the only one in the house who was being abused.
What podcast brings you true stories of exceptionally smart and insanely dumb crimes every week?
Dumb and Busted, obviously.
But Hannah, where's your one-stop shop if you want to hear about a killer nurse, a pervy arsonist, or a group of hella old dudes breaking into a vault?
Dumb and Busted. Allison, come on, seriously? We host the show together.
Okay, last question. Where can I go if I need to hear the #1 song of 1999, I Want It That Way?
What? The Backstreet Boys album Millennium? How did we even get on this tangent?
Oh, okay. Sorry for being the only one who's ever fallen victim to their tight harmonies and timeless songs. Anyway, please listen and subscribe to Dumb and Busted on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Crime you later!
There are many true crime podcasts available, each offering a different perspective to the genre.
Each with their own niche that pulls the listener in by tugging at their heartstrings or their funny bone in one way or another.
What we aim to do with Status Pending is make you think. We want you to feel as though you're connected to the case. We want you to feel something.
The cases we're going to cover have discrepancies of some sort, and may or may not be well known.
They are either unsolved, prematurely closed, or open without any solid leads.
We want to get these stories out to the public, for the family and for the victims.
Join us every month for a different case, which will be a different chapter in our podcast, as we take a 3-part look into the facts.
We'll have interviews, expert opinions, and more. And we'll also be looking for suggestions from you for cases to take on as we move forward.
You can email us at statuspendingpodcast@gmail.com.
And you can subscribe to Status Pending wherever you listen to podcasts.